If you're involved with community affairs or care about public policy, there's every chance that at one time or another you have found yourself wishing that you could influence your state legislature, or perhaps even the U.S. Congress, perhaps on some issue that you or your group believe to be critically important. Could be almost anything: highway safety, public health, business regulation, criminal justice, the schools. The list is really endless. Meanwhile, there may not be some powerful interest group willing or able to step up to the plate and take on your issue. If not, you're going to be on your own. And if you really do want to make something happen, you'll definitely not be satisfied just writing a few letters to the editor or leaving a phone message for your state legislator. If you're serious about these issues, you or your small group may very well find yourselves feeling that you have no choice but to hire a lobbyist. I'm here today to tell you that hiring a costly professional lobbyist is not always necessary. It's possible, of course, that you simply can't afford a lobbyist. Maybe you have no other option but to do it yourself. But even if you can afford the price, sometimes hiring a lobbyist is still not necessarily the best choice. It may turn out that you or your small private citizens group can be quite effective all on your own. My name is Don Stewart. I began my career as a practicing lawyer, but I later became a nonprofit executive where for some 20 years I lobbied lawmakers in various jurisdictions, primarily in the Washington state legislature. My work dealt with issues associated with natural resources, commercial fisheries, agriculture, and the environment. Many times over those years, I watched individual citizens and small, poorly funded groups do an amazing job of representing their own interests. Often, they just figured it out on their own, and then they went for it. Certainly, lobbying Congress or a state legislature yourself can be challenging. Of course, you know what you want to tell those lawmakers, but still you have to wonder, why should they listen to us if we don't have a bunch of money to fund their political campaigns? Or perhaps wouldn't we find ourselves hopelessly mired in some kind of political quicksand, or facing mysterious intrigues or hidden agendas, or beset with background deals that we could never anticipate and deal with? Here's the simple truth. A great many legislative matters are actually much easier for a private citizen or citizens group to influence than one might ever imagine. In actual practice, almost anyone can have a significant impact, sometimes actually more impact on your own than you'd necessarily get from a costly professional lobbyist. In this little tutorial, I'll walk you through the process, show you how, as a private citizen, you can make yourself very effective at influencing legislation. Once you've watched my video, maybe you'll decide you do need a lobbyist. If so, more power to you. The advice and personal efforts of an experienced lobbyist can absolutely sometimes be indispensable. But if you do end up hiring a lobbyist, this video will at least help you make an informed decision and help empower you to make a more effective use of the lobbyist that you hire. But, as often the case, hiring a lobbyist isn't possible. Don't give up. You may be just as effective, possibly even more so, if you and your small group simply do it yourself. The starting point for any lobbying has to be your jurisdiction's official legislative website. Every public legislative body will have one. This site is the one we use in Washington State. It's at leg.wa.gov. Your first step will be to locate and familiarize yourself with your jurisdiction's official website. It'll be more or less like this one. You'll be referring back to it frequently. This is where you'll find the basic critical information on the legislative process and on what, at any given point in time, is actually going on in your local state house and on your particular issue. This will include a multitude of matters, such as legislators. Who are the legislators? What is their background? Who do they represent? What are their committee or other assignments? How can I contact them? On committees, what are the responsibilities of the various legislative committees? Which legislators are on each committee? Who are the committee staff? How do I contact these people? On deadlines, by when in each session must bills be filed? By when must they be given a hearing, referred out of committee by executive session, assigned a vote on the floor, be passed in each legislative body, House and Senate, or be signed by the governor? On bills and their status, what bills have been filed, including yours? What has happened to them? What is their current status, and what is due to happen next? And on calendars, when will your key committees meet and where? When will any given bill receive a hearing? When will the bill be voted on? This is especially important because there's very often little advance notice of hearing dates. You'll need to be very vigilant to be on top of your issue, especially early in the session where hearings are being scheduled. This website is your starting point. It provides the guidance that you need throughout the entire process. If you do decide to do this yourself, you will find yourself consulting this site nearly every single day. With that website for your jurisdiction at hand, let's walk through the typical legislative process step by step. If you're offering a bill for passage, these will be the steps that you need to take to get that bill passed. If you're opposing a bill, these will be the critical points where you may be able to intervene. Those points in the process where you may have a chance to stop that bill. So the first thing you need to do, of course, is to familiarize yourself with current legislation. If you want to propose new legislation, or if you want to oppose some change that's being offered by someone else, it's critical to know exactly what the law actually currently provides. A good starting point will be the current statutes in your state. If there's a relevant existing statute, that's where you'll need to start. If it isn't, you'll need to know that going in. The Revised Code of Washington, for example, looks like this. It's online, and it allows you to access all of the Washington Code. If you're proposing a new law, once you have at least a rough idea of what you want to do, the first requirement for any bill is finding a legislator who's willing to sponsor it and to file it for you. If you want to pass a bill, that is where you start. One place, of course, to begin would be with your own elected legislator. But if they aren't particularly interested, don't give up. Try some others who seem more amenable to your idea. Hopefully, you'll find one or more willing legislators. Ideally, there'll be ones who are both passionate about your issue and who are influential. In Washington State, in the 2024 legislative session, that would have meant you'd have needed to go to this page in the legislative website to there identify and enlist to your cause one or more of the 49 state senators that are listed here. Or you'd have gone to this page and enlisted one of the 98 state senators, or maybe both. If it's off session, you may need to meet those legislators locally in their own home district at their local or regional offices, so there could be some travel involved. Those local office locations are also typically noted here on this website. You may also decide to meet your legislator at their offices on site at the Capitol. That will, of course, require that you wait until the legislature is actually in session. If you're new to your state legislature, it would be wise to make an early visit to the Capitol. Clarify in your mind where the various legislative offices, hearing rooms, and legislative chambers are located. You may be surprised at how accessible these legislative offices are and how Spartan they are. In Washington, for example, this is a view inside the House office building. The staffers will be located in one of these cubicles, and the members' offices will be inside through one of these doors. This is what an actual legislative office building looks in Washington. It's different for every state or jurisdiction, but this one is where House members in the state of Washington and their staffers meet people and do most of their work. When you do first meet with your hoped-for bill sponsor, it's nice to have at least a rough draft of your proposed bill to start with. But frankly, all you really need is a sound, reasonably specific idea. That legislator will probably have ideas of their own about what might be included in your bill once you get them on board. With luck, your prime sponsoring legislature may be sufficiently interested to be quite willing to ask their staff to help you draft up the actual language. So do a little research in advance so you'll have a reasonably sound understanding of what makes sense, what's possible, and what will actually work. But also be prepared to work with that legislator on the actual language that's going to end up in your bill. Once you have the bill language and a prime sponsor, if possible, you'll also want several co-sponsors willing to add their names to the bill early on and to give it early credibility. Ideally, you'll approach your targeted legislators well in advance of the legislative session. At that point in time, you'll have your best, most unhurried opportunity to meet them, to make your point, and to get it all done before the legislative session has ever even begun. Now, before a bill has been written and filed, can be a major point of opportunity for you. If you're trying to pass a bill, this may well be the last point in time before anyone else knows or maybe even suspects that there is an issue in the offing. Once the session begins, everyone involved will be deeply pressured for time, and your opportunities to engage with and influence them will be tightly constrained. Whatever you can do before that session begins will be hugely worthwhile. If you're opposing a bill, hopefully you'll have already caught wind of an approaching legislative session. If so, now, before the session begins, is when you can get ahead of the game and begin lining up active opposition, or maybe begin cooling the ardor of possible proponents. Or, if you feel there is such an opportunity, now is when you may have a chance, before positions have hardened, to approach your opponents and perhaps convince them to draft their proposed legislation in a manner that you can live with, or perhaps find a non-legislative solution that works for everyone. That may require that you do some chasing around your state to the home districts of your legislators and of your opponents, or do some very strategic phoning, emailing, and even Zooming. In either case, now, in advance of session, is when you will have the time to begin identifying, contacting, and organizing the public support you're going to need later. Once a bill has been filed and the process is underway, things will begin to happen very, very quickly. If you haven't prepared in advance, you may not have the time to properly organize, support, or engender the opposition. This is especially a problem for opponents. It's really easy to get caught off guard, so pay attention. When a bill has actually been filed, that will be when it will first appear on the legislative website. That will be the first time it will become a matter of public record. And if you're its proponent, it may be the first time opponents of the bill even know for sure what you have in mind or that a bill is in the offing. If your issue is not one that will necessarily attract immediate attention from the press, or if you're not closely and publicly involved in this matter, it is quite entirely possible that legislation could be filed and go a good distance down the road toward passage, or could even pass before you even know a thing about it. If you oppose this legislation, that can be a problem. On this tracking webpage is the only place you can be sure you'll learn what has happened outside of maybe seeing in the local evening news some news report. Once your bill is filed, things can happen quickly, so it is easy to be caught off guard. So even if you suspect that a bill could be possible, you should have someone checking this tracking page every single day to be absolutely sure you catch it in time and that you're able to respond. This is where and when you'll be able to get the bill number, and that's when you can begin tracking its progress through the legislative process. Pro or con, pay very close attention to the daily status of your bill. Things can go quiet on a bill for a good long time, and then suddenly everything can begin happening all at once. So pay attention to this website. If you lack inside intelligence amongst your opposition, but perhaps suspect that they may offer a bill, you'll want to make absolutely sure you don't miss something. The only real way to do that may be to be very carefully and actively monitoring this legislative website for the many bills that are filed on a daily basis from the very start of a given legislative session. The legislative website will likely have an alphabetical subject matter specific language or keyword index. You can use that to help catch legislation that might be of concern to you. Needless to say, it's incredibly easy to miss something if you're not thorough and persistent. Keep in mind that a clever opponent might even intentionally draft their bill in a manner that will make it harder for you to catch it. So watch closely. Tracking bills can be tedious, but it is absolutely necessary if you're to avoid being taken by surprise or maybe end up entering the fray too late to do anything about it. Once your legislative session actually begins, you're going to be spending a good deal of time physically present on site at your state legislature. You're likely to find working there to be both chaotic and inconvenient. Professional lobbyists will often have an office, probably one within easy walking distance from Capitol Hill. But as a non-professional, you're likely to struggle to find places to be and to work on while you're near the legislative campus, while you're there and actually engaged in lobbying your bill. Before the legislative session begins, you may wish to scout out the Capitol for private, quiet places to meet, to place phone calls, or to simply sit and work quietly on your own. You'll be spending a good deal of time here, especially if your home or your office are a good distance away. And very often, there aren't a great many comfortable places to sit and work quietly out of the way. Unless you already live near your state capitol, it is a good idea to scope out the on-site coffee shops, lobbies, seating areas, hotels, and other possible venues where you can actually spend useful time. For example, I used to rent a slip in Olympia in a marina where I moored my small 26-foot pleasure boat, and through the session I had a place to go and work in off times, or if the weather turned bad, to stay overnight. Legislatures often have a lobbyist organization. In Washington state, that's called the Third House. That organization may be able to offer you a temporarily secure and satellite office or a location to just even leave your coat, to take messages, to safely leave behind a briefcase or an overcoat or an umbrella, and to meet someone over coffee in a quiet setting. Amateur or professional, you're likely to need amenities like those to do your work. You should probably scope them out in advance. Then there's committee assignments. Once a bill is filed, it will be assigned to a subject matter policy committee. Maybe there is only one committee whose subject expertise is appropriate to hear your bill, but there will very often be more than one. The bill may even have been purposefully drafted in a manner to design it so that it will influence its committee assignment. Which committee is assigned to hear your bill may be decisive on whether the bill gets heard at all or whether it has any real chance of passing out of that committee with a do-pass recommendation. Suppose, for example, that your bill deals with providing insurance for agricultural crops planted in an environmentally responsible manner. So you could end up with that bill being heard in a committee that deals with insurance, or it could be assigned to a committee that deals with agriculture, or perhaps it will be assigned to one that deals with the environment. The political leadership of the legislative house involved makes that committee assignment. If there is one of those committees you prefer, either because its topical expertise is more appropriate or because its membership will be more amenable to your position, you'll want to make your preference known to the body's leadership before they make that assignment and try to influence their decision. A bad committee assignment can kill a bill. Consider also the financial cost of the legislation you proposed. Your bill is likely to have a fiscal note attached to it. Maybe the bill will cost the government little or nothing to administer, but if there's a public cost to administer it, an appropriation may be needed to make it work. If so, at this stage, legislative staff associated with the appropriation may be asked to research and identify those potential costs, and your bill then may be assigned a fiscal note that will follow it for the balance of its voyage through the legislative process. Obviously, if the cost is high, your bill will become more difficult to pass. If you anticipate a troubling fiscal note, you may be able to influence whether one is made or to influence the estimated cost by fully explaining the matter through those appropriations staff people who are assigned to research and write that note. Find out who they are, contact them, and explain your point of view on the likely cost of your legislation. If it's your bill, you may even decide to amend it to reduce its fiscal cost. Then there's the question of getting a public hearing. Just because a bill has been assigned to a committee does not guarantee that that committee will actually hold a public hearing and take testimony on its content or on the wisdom of the bill. It is usually up to the committee chair to decide to or not to schedule such a hearing. If you want a hearing, you're going to need to ask. If nobody asks the chair to hear the bill, you or some supportive member of that committee, for example, that chair may just decide to let it die on the theory that nobody cares about it anyway. If you want a bill to die, you can ask for that as well. Committee chairs typically have complete authority to or not to hold a hearing. This is how undesirable, unpopular, or politically challenged legislation often dies. The committee chair just doesn't assign it a hearing. One way or the other, you need to speak to the committee chair, convince them, and you may also need to speak to other members of that committee, and if necessary, ask them to intervene with the chair. If you get a hearing, there's certain work that you need to do before that hearing ever starts. You may have very little advance notice of a committee hearing, so it's wise to begin lobbying the committee members well before the hearing has even been scheduled. And be prepared to act quickly once it has. This is one of the most strategic points in the process, because there are only a few legislators assigned to this committee whom you'll need to influence, so that becomes a possibility to influence them. If you can prevent this small group from passing the bill favorably out of committee, it can be stopped right there. If you want to pass this bill, This is a point of extreme danger. In either case, you definitely should arrange a brief individual meeting with each of those committee members at their offices to discuss the matter. You may also arrange for small groups of your supporters to meet with those legislators together, perhaps making sure each legislator meets with some or a small group of your supporters who reside in their own legislative district, because those are the people they're most likely to be listening to. Keep in mind that the legislator has limited time. Most such meetings will be 15 minutes at most. So those meetings must be very strategic and very effective and be carefully prepared for. I advise always to make an effort with all of the committee members, even those you believe may oppose you. That includes everyone, not just the people solidly in your camp. Meeting with them will educate you on what you face, and who knows, you may make a convert or prevent a conversion to the other side. You may also learn something that you may not have known. Make sure each and every legislator on that committee understands both why is your position sound public policy and why is supporting your position good politics for that legislator. If you have real or potential public and media interest in your position, now will be your logical opportunity to make that public case. If there are citizens willing to write letters or make calls to the media or to their legislators, you may wish to have them do that now. You'll want to choose when to apply that kind of political pressure based upon at which stage in the process you feel it will be most effective. But now, prior to the bill's subject matter policy hearing, may well be the time. And keep in mind that as well that most potent media sources to approach may very well be the local ones that serve the specific district where the legislator involved resides, not necessarily the statewide or, in the case of Congress, national press. Keep in mind also that your advance notice of this hearing may be very short, only a matter of, at best, very few days. So you need to think ahead and be ready to muster your forces quickly when the time and date for that hearing are actually announced. Decision. You may elect to be selective and strategic about who appears and testifies at that hearing. Or you may hope to overwhelm the members with the numbers and the passion of your supporters. You may decide to be the reasonable one who can offer some logical path forward amidst the controversy. Or you may wish to take a hard line if you feel that will help wavering members decide in your favor. If you plan some kind of public event on the grounds of the legislature, this may be the day to do that, or not. Think it through. But if you have an amendment to suggest, an amendment that might make the bill less harmful or more desirable, you may decide to offer that amendment to your opponents early on, or you may decide to do that at the hearing itself. If you do, be prepared with the appropriate documentation. Maybe have it in the hands of the key legislators in advance of the hearing. And if possible, prime one of your favorable legislators to ask you questions about it when you testify, and then hopefully take the lead in supporting it with their colleagues. If you've enlisted citizens willing to testify who might make impressive witnesses, make sure they show up and are well prepared. There will typically be a sign-up sheet on a table near the public entrance where you and your witnesses can sign in to speak. Make sure the witnesses know that and that they need to sign in. There will be a time limit also, probably as little as maybe 3 minutes. Make sure the witnesses know that time limit and that they take it seriously. And if you wish to speak early yourself, sign up first and early, or if you wish to speak at the end, sign up the sheet after most of the others have already signed in, and then add your name at the end of the list just before the committee staffer comes out to pick up the paper for delivery to the chair at the start of the meeting. The next step in your process is an executive session. Even though your chair of your committee has agreed to a hearing, that does not automatically mean that the committee members will get to vote on the bill's referral. That chair may still, post-hearing, simply refuse to bring the bill up for a vote in executive session. If so, the bill will die. So this is another opportunity to kill it if you oppose that bill, and if you support the bill, it's really wise to bring affirmatively up with the chair the question of executive committee. Ask the chair to bring that bill up for a vote. Otherwise, it could appear your support is only lukewarm, maybe the bill isn't worth the effort or the political capital required to pass it. In general, if you want something to happen pretty much anywhere in the legislative process, usually you're going to have to ask. Don't ever just assume that something will happen. You need to ask, or the chances are it won't. The next step is Rules Committee. If you do in fact get an executive committee hearing and your bill actually does pass out of committee with a do pass referral, the bill then is referred to the Rules Committee, whose responsibility it is to decide if it will be presented for a floor vote. So you need to be sure that there is at least one legislator, preferably a committed and or influential one, who is specifically primed to offer your bill in the Rules Committee for presentation on the floor. So you actually get the full legislature to vote on your proposed legislation. Again, assume you're going to need to ask. If you don't ask, it's quite possible it just won't happen. You might also want to make sure none of the members of that Rules Committee are dyed-in-the-wool opponents of your legislation. If somebody in that committee cares enough about this bill to move it to the floor, it will get the support and probably will move. But if there's somebody on that committee that really truly doesn't like that bill, it can very easily die there. This can become a battleground, and you need to deal with it. If there's somebody willing to pay a political price to oppose your bill, that can kill it right then and there. Typically, however, if some member of the Rules Committee offers a bill, the rest of the committee members will acquiesce, if only because they all know they need the other members' support for other bills that they care about. A bill can occasionally be stopped in the Rules Committee by a negative vote, but it will surely die if nobody asks that it move on. The next question you have to consider is the Appropriations Committee. If a bill passes out of the Subject Matter Policy Committee, it may then also be referred to an Appropriations Committee for approval of its financial impact, so that that noted fiscal cost can be included in the government's budget. Needless to say, surviving this fiscal battle may be every bit as important and every bit as difficult as passing the bill itself. It may be as easy or easier to kill an appropriation as it would be to kill the bill itself. You may therefore need to pay as close attention to the hearing on and the status of the appropriation as you do pay to the bill itself. Opportunities for public input into the appropriations process are typically much more constrained than they are in the subject matter policy process. Yes, once a bill has passed its subject matter committee, there will be some pressure from legislators who passed it for their colleagues in appropriations to approve covering its cost. But this is by no means assured. Don't neglect the appropriations process. If there is a necessary appropriation for your bill to succeed, track it, stick with it, and pay as much attention to that appropriation as you pay to the bill itself. Any bill can live or die in the appropriations process just as easily as it can in the subject matter policy process. If you've made it this far, the next step is the floor vote. Getting out of committee with referral to the floor does absolutely not guarantee that your bill will end up even being called on the floor for a vote. Once you're out of Rules Committee, the legislative leadership will determine when the vote goes to the floor. You may need to actually ask that this be done. If you support the bill, you will also want to make sure it's referred to the floor early enough that it doesn't fall victim to some end-of-session time constraint, and to make sure it isn't scheduled at a time or in connection with some other bill that may in some way prejudice its chances. Again, this is typically one of many situations in this process where if you don't ask, it may not happen. So ask, or make absolutely certain that one of your supporting legislators asks. And make sure the vote will be timely. If you oppose the bill and can influence leadership in how or when they assign it for a floor vote, this may be another opportunity to kill it through delay, bad timing, or disinterest. The floor vote involves a great many legislators, as few as 50 and potentially several hundred. So lobbying them will be a huge test of your resolve and of your resources. Ideally, if you'd like to meet with every legislator, that would be great. But that depends upon whether you have the resources to do that. If you do, by all means, try. In practice, however, this can be realistically impossible. Whatever you do, keep in mind that most of those voting members are not members of your subject matter policy committee. They probably know very little about your bill or about its subject matter, and that may be either a problem or an opportunity. Their lack of previous involvement in or concern with your legislation may be your opportunity to influence their decision. At this point, you may feel like you should be done, but you're not. Most legislative bodies have two houses, typically a House of Representatives and a Senate. It's much like the United States Congress. When a bill has passed the first of these houses, the one in which it originated, the entire process that we talked about above must begin again. It has to be completed with final passage in the second house before it can then move on to the governor or chief executive for signature or veto. Sometimes if you're offering a bill, you may wish to file an identical version in each house simultaneously, and then ultimately run with the one that moves most quickly. If you're opposing legislation, keep in mind you may need to mount your opposition twice. If a bill does in fact pass both bills in very similar but perhaps not identical versions, the two bills will be sent to a joint conference committee whose job it is to resolve the differences and draft and offer a bill that can pass both bodies successfully. The final product is then resubmitted to both bodies for a final vote. You may be able to influence who's on that conference committee, and you will certainly need to speak with its members to make sure that your needs for this legislation are fully understood. So now we're down to the governor. The governor or other chief executive will have their own lobbyist. This is sometimes called a legislative liaison. This person should be on your radar early, because once a bill has passed, it may be too late to initiate contact effectively with the governor's office and still fully explain your position. Your governor usually has a tightly limited time period within which to veto or sign. By the time the bill is on the governor's desk, you need to have already approached and convinced them in person what needs to happen. Beyond the governor's legislative liaison, the governor's lobbyist, There will typically also be a member of the governor's professional staff. He'll have an office responsible for technical policy related to the subject matter of most legislation, probably someone assigned to matters related to your kind of bill. This person also should be an early point of contact, as their opinion and recommendation may carry a great deal of weight on a potential veto or a line item in the governor's appropriations package. They can warn you in advance of the likelihood of a veto and can make suggestions. In Washington, the governor's policy office advisors have their own separate office. This is what it looks like here in Washington. Most, if not all, states and the U.S. Congress have laws that require lobbyists to register and to disclose expenditures and activities associated with their lobbying activities. You should absolutely check your local jurisdiction's laws on this subject. If you are unpaid and are acting solely for yourself and only at your own personal expense, you may, I emphasize may, be exempt from those requirements. If, however, any of your time or expenses are covered by another, an employer, a corporate entity, or another individual, you may well be required to register in advance. The law may come into play the moment you enter into an agreement with others to influence government action, or when you first communicate with a legislator or other governmental personnel in an effort to influence a government decision. In the state of Washington, the relevant agency is the Public Disclosure Commission. It's located at a website, www.pdc.wa.gov. This is a screenshot of the Washington's PDC website. Meanwhile, please keep carefully in mind that in the United States Congress, both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate have requirements for lobbying disclosure, and you need to pay attention to those requirements if you're going to get involved. So everything that I've discussed above can be done by or with the aid and guidance of a professional lobbyist. An independent contract lobbyist may charge by the month. They may make a flat charge for a particular legislative effort, or they may charge by a single legislative session. Retaining their assistance in getting a bill passed may easily cost at a bare minimum from $30,000 to $60,000 for a single legislative session. But you may also spend a great deal more. There's no doubt, however, that an experienced, successful professional lobbyist who knows the people involved and knows the process can be a huge asset. This is especially true if there are party issues involved or if there are appropriations issues. Lobbyists typically specialize by the type of issue or client, so you will need to do some research to identify one who's appropriate for your cause. Spending that kind of money also may seem less burdensome for a small business or nonprofit organization when they consider the amount of staff time that's likely to be consumed in the effort to do the job in-house. Whether you're going to do it with a lobbyist or do it yourself, it's important to understand the motivations of the people who are involved in these legislative processes. We Americans love to talk trash about our elected officials. We often assume the worst about their motives. It has, however, been my personal experience that most elected legislators are deeply committed to the public good, and it's wise to begin with that assumption in dealing with them. If one can help their re-election cause with some kind of contribution, if you can make sure your own supporters, their constituents, know that they helped your cause, that will always go well with an elected official. In reality, however, despite what you may suspect, that kind of explicit political recompense is very often not really necessary. Even if they are not personally motivated by your cause, they or their staffers will be interested in the public policy case that you can make, if only because they may one day need to repeat that case to others as a rationale for why they helped you or for why they did not. Legislators face literally several thousand bills every single session. Any given legislator may be forced to act on scores of those bills, so they're not and simply cannot be as knowledgeable about every single piece of legislation before them as you may initially assume. Their committee assignments will help them focus on matters within their expertise, of course, but it's best to assume that they know very little about your specific issue and to make sure that they acquire a clear understanding from the very start. Do your research, at least on the primary targets of your lobbying effort. These are public figures, so learning something about their background and interests shouldn't be particularly difficult, and it can be hugely important. As with anyone you hope to influence, try to see the matter from their point of view, political or otherwise. You'll be tightly constrained in the amount of time that they can spend with you and commit to your cause, so plan your presentations and make them count. The vast majority of legislation actually has blessedly little or nothing to do with political party or party politics. If, however, your bill touches on issues of political party concern, you will need to communicate with party leadership to secure their support and to coordinate your efforts. If possible, you may wish to amend your proposal so you remove its partisan appeal or aversion, and so it allows you to seek support on both sides of the political aisle, or add those materials as the case may be. The good news, however, the very good news, is that everything outlined above can very often also be done by a smart, committed layperson or by a small, well-organized citizens group, if they're willing to invest the necessary time and effort. If you're considering it, you're going to need to make an educated decision about what will work best in your situation. You may be quite wise in deciding to hire a professional if that's the best course. It is not my intent by this video to talk you out of that. Hiring it done is also, however, not necessarily and automatically the better choice. Despite the many advantages of a professional lobbyist, a private citizen also has some very significant advantages. Think expertise, for example. Bear in mind how little, perhaps most legislators may know about your issue. They're likely to feel more comfortable and confident dealing directly with you as the person most immediately involved in your issue and doubtless the most knowledgeable about it and its complications, not necessarily with some anonymous lobbyist. Think about connections. In a similar way, an actual leader in your group is the person closest to and most able to speak about the opinions, concerns, sensitivities, and feelings of your fellow members. Your legislators will want to be confident that what they do on your issue will be fully and duly appreciated by those members. You're likely to be the person best positioned to give them that assurance. Think about the visibility. A lobbyist will probably represent several clients. You will represent just one. You'll have no mixed feelings or potential conflicting interests to deal with, no history, no uncertainties about how your dealings with this legislator on this matter may complicate your relationship on some other matter now or in the future. Every legislator dealing with you will know that they can deal with you as an open book. Think about the matter of just balance. When a legislator sides with you, they may very well create enemies of others. So you may be in the best position to help them design a path that gets you to what you want without necessarily unduly forcing that legislator to make enemies of others. Similarly, if helping you will inevitably create enemies, you are the best person closest to the issue in the best position to explain why the support of your group can be of particular value and to identify the various ways your group can be of help in this legislator's political future. So consider the matter of money. You may well find that campaign contributions actually play a much smaller role in most legislators' thinkings than you might have imagined. But to the extent that political and financial support come to seem important, you're the person who can help most directly to secure that financial support from members of your group or community. Or you're also the person to offer that legislator an opportunity to make their own case to your membership, perhaps at its meetings, for example, or through its newsletter. Think about just simple empathy. I think we tend to forget that most legislators are not professional politicians. In most states, they are decidedly part-time. They frequently spend less than half their time engaged in their elected positions often. Their legislative salaries are typically quite modest. They come to the legislature from other professions on which they must rely for their family's primary financial support. Just like you, they are most likely involved in politics out of a sense of social responsibility. Their interactions with you as a citizen lobbyist may turn out to be much more natural and committed than it would be if they were dealing with some professional lobbyist. So I hope you found the above brief outline useful. If you'd like to see it all in writing, I will have posted a typescript version of the above presentation on my website at www.donstewart.net. There on my website, you'll also find details about my published Washington State House mystery series of mystery novels. In those novels, the fictional protagonist, Sandy Dalton, is a lobbyist who solves murder mysteries associated with the Washington State Legislature. At worst, you'll hopefully find them fun, and who knows, reading them may also help you hone your own lobbying skills for the next time you take on lobbying a bill in Congress or in your own state legislature. Thank you very much for watching.